Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, with the employment group from Offit Kurman. And today we are talking COVID, talking a little bit about just the updates, where we're at with COVID restrictions and the new relief bill. And so there's a lot of things that are, changing right now and looking like they're moving in the positive direction. We've been talking a lot about vaccines on this program. So that's still going on. We still got people getting vaccinated, and we've gotten some additional guidance from the CDC on what people who are vaccinated should and shouldn't be doing if they come into contact with people with COVID. And we've also gotten some additional guidance from the state on some lifting of the restrictions here in Maryland. So I wanted to just cover a couple of those things. I'm going to start with the Maryland restrictions being, a lot of the restrictions are being lifted by Governor Hogan. So I know he just had a press conference a couple of days before we were recording this, and he's lifting some of the capacity restrictions and mask mandates still in effect. But, he's very much talking about, wanting to return a little bit more to normal, that we're all reminiscing about this time last year and how we were going into lockdown and the things that we miss. And he made some comment about hoping to move back into doing things that we miss and that we're reminiscing about. So, hopefully we're moving in that direction. And what have you been seeing, Russell?
Yeah, well, of note, in when he was talking about returning to things that we miss, we've been reminiscing about, returning to work was not one of those things that was highlighted or is really part of the subject matter of those orders. Obviously, if you work in a restaurant, if you work in retail, more people can come into the facilities. Some of those maximum capacity restrictions are being loosened up or eliminated. But from an employer standpoint, you still got to comply with the CDC guidance, or you still should comply with the CDC guidance. The mask mandate is still going to be in effect here in Maryland. So, if you're if you're not in a private office with the door shut, you still have to wear a mask. So, I don't know that it necessarily means drastic changes for a lot of employers quite yet, but it's hopeful, and it's a reason for optimism, and it's a sign that we're getting people vaccinated, we're moving in the right direction. So that's one of the my big takeaways from what's happening here in Maryland. One of the other things that I've spent some time with over the last week is the new guidance from the CDC related to people who are now fully vaccinated. And my parents in particular were glad to hear that spending time with grandchildren who have not been vaccinated is now acceptable and approved by the CDC as long as the grandparents are fully vaccinated. So that's an exciting note for a lot of people. But with respect to how it impacts the workplace, the guidance now that was released last week from the time we're recording this says that if you're fully vaccinated and you come into close contact with someone who has COVID-19, you don't need to quarantine. If you're not fully vaccinated, we're still in the 10-day quarantine or 7-day quarantine with a negative test after day 5. But if you've been fully vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine. One caveat on that is a different CDC guidance says that you don't need to quarantine if you've been fully vaccinated in the last 90 days. So there's a little bit of uncertainty from the CDC in terms of their messaging around whether this is a permanent or indefinite for the foreseeable future ability to avoid having to quarantine, or whether it's just a 3-month window from post-vaccination. But I would imagine, especially as we get more data, as we get people moving into that greater than 90 days from full vaccination classification, that we're going to get a refinement of the CDC guidance on. And Sarah, I don't know about you, but I haven't seen anything. I'm no public health expert, but I haven't seen anything that would cause concern on that front.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's interesting. We're in an interesting time because as things are starting to loosen up a little bit, it's hard because you read, we're back in this phase where it's like you read the headlines, and the headlines aren't really enough right now because by the headlines you might think, oh, well, like here in Maryland, the capacity restrictions are being removed. Well, what does that mean for my business? Well, you got to dig a little bit deeper because I know, so for example, I go to Orange Theory Fitness, which is a, group fitness class. And though the capacity restrictions for gyms are being, are being removed, they still have to socially distance and you still have to mask, right? So for us to socially distance in our class, they still have to be at half capacity, right? So it really doesn't change anything at all. So that business had to take a look at, the rules and say like, well, does this change anything? And in this instance, it didn't. So for some businesses, it is going to change things, and for some, it isn't. Similar with the CDC vaccination guidance is that, the biggest change is what you were mentioning is the quarantine aspect of things and not having to juggle that piece with people who have been vaccinated. But largely, a lot of other things are going to stay the same. Even vaccinated employees are still going to be having to wear masks and socially distance and things like that. And I think now is probably it's even more important to communicate with employees exactly what rules are in place, because it's going to be a confusing time again, just kind of like when we were at the beginning of this, when it was really important to stay on top of communicating with employees. I think we're really in that boat right now, because there's going to be some confusion and things are going to be moving fast, hopefully, over the next couple months.
Yeah, well, first off, that's 5 million splat points for mentioning your gym during this and giving them free advertising during OK at Work.
Yeah. Hashtag Orange Theory
Uh,
Fitness.
but yeah, I mean, I've heard too, like employers are getting people back into the workplace, are saying, we're discontinuing remote work. We've seen a trend of that happening as well. And again, these are all good things. It's all, based on the optimism of the vaccine and warmer weather and the numbers going in the right direction, the metrics. So that's all very well and good. But as Sarah's saying, this is no time to let up on your in office, your in workplace policies. You should still have employees completing questionnaires and surveys before they get access to the workplace. You should still have clear policies about when they're not allowed in the workplace because they have symptoms. You should still have the protocols in place for contact tracing and quarantining. Obviously the guidance has changed a little bit with fully vaccinated people, but it's as more people come into the office, it's just as important to stay up to date on your operating procedures.
Yeah, and it's an important reminder that the virus is still with us, which is something Governor Hogan said during his press conference. It's not that the virus is gone; it's still here, and so it's still something that we need to be following all the guidance, wearing masks, doing all those things. And also, I mean, the American Rescue Plan, it talks about leave, so there's still employees that are going to be potentially getting COVID and getting sick, and because this virus is still here, though we're hopeful and we're excited, it's still something that we're going to be dealing with. And so, as part of that plan on the federal level, they are expanding the Families First Coronavirus Response Leave through September 30th, but it's not required. It's voluntary, and you can still get tax credits for it. So that's kind of just an example of how we're still dealing with this virus and still having to deal with the potential of people being sick, and still having to deal with those issues, even as we're getting excited about reopening and all these things. So just something to keep in mind. It's still here, and we still need to make considerations for people who are sick or who are still dealing with the consequences of this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. This is another. I mean, we've been saying be adaptable and adjust and fluid for a year now, and this is a step in the right direction. But it's not the last step. So stay with it, keep the policies in place, stay alert, and just be happy we're taking a step forward.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Russell, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.